Hello, artists and animators, and welcome to our third panel discussion on adult animation. To celebrate next week's launch of the second edition of John Evershed's Adult Animation White Paper, today we're discussing the industry of adult animation with four guests who have watched the world of animation very closely. Since I've already mentioned him, let's start with John. John, who are you and what is your origin story?
Thanks, Toon Boom Mike. My origin story. Well, first of all, before I get into my story, we should mention writers. I noticed that you said welcome artists and animators, but I think this business is going to increasingly depend on writing as a key part of that whole making new content, largely because adult animation is driven in many ways by the writing. It begins there. So my personal background, though, is that I am the CEO of High Concentrate. I'm an independent producer. I published the white paper. It's coming out next week. Kind of excited about it because it's a substantially expanded version of the previous one that I wrote a year ago. Tracks all the trends that are going on right now in terms of current and upcoming series by genre, IP origin, all kinds of things. There's also a database associated with it. Anyway, so my personal background, though, is I'm producing a couple of series at the moment that are in various stages of development and production. These are more genre series than my prior work, which tended to be mostly adult animated comedy in the short format. I was the former CEO of Mondo Media. We did a lot of animated short format content targeted at teens and young adults. Some of that stuff spun up into television series as well. And I've been at this whole adult animation game. I actually raised capital to go after Mondo in the first internet bubble. That's how far back my experience with this stuff goes. So I've been going at it for quite a while now. I'm really excited about where it's heading at the moment. And we'll get into this in this panel.
All right. And Eric, what is your origin story?
Well, hey everyone. So I've been in the adult animation game since about 95. I started my career at MTV Animation, where over about 6 years, I put about 12 animated series on the air. So the highlights of that was I worked on Eon Flux, and my development department produced shows like Daria, Celebrity Deathmatch, Undergrads, and we kind of were the early wave of primetime animation at the MTV days. So following that, I actually worked in Japan for about 6 years, and I was one of the earlier, I wasn't the earliest, but one of the earlier pioneers in that format. And during my time there, I produced Afro Samurai with Samuel L. Jackson, adapted the first American comic, Witchblade, into an animated series for adults, and also produced Linkin Park's music video, Breaking the Habit. So it was a really great time, and I think it was exciting because it was Afro Samurai is the only, to this day, animated ever to be nominated for the Emmy, and we actually won the Emmy for Outstanding Individual Art Direction. So it's kind of this crazy lightning in a bottle. And then I've been an independent. I've worked for production companies in Canada, in the U.S. I was a showrunner for 2 cycles of Transformers, which were focused on the adult market, the original G1 fan, as they call it. And then I spent some time working for the Russo brothers over the past few years, and I helped them set up and get attached to Magic the Gathering, which is Hasbro's current biggest franchise, even bigger than Transformers. But it's a card game that whose average audience is age 27, because the Magic the Gathering's been around since the mid 90s. So over the past few years, I actually launched a platform called Surviving Animation, which is specifically geared towards people interested in learning about the business of cartoons. So it's a free platform that I use to educate people. And I'm an independent consultant. I work with basically anyone who contacts me on my website to help them with animated series proposals and getting development materials put together for the marketplace. So, to finish my story, I'm actually really now focused on location-based animation, which is kind of theme park-based. So I've got a client right now in Florida working to adapt an independent theme park based in Mallorca, Spain, to make into a full SVOD focused primetime animated series. So I've always, done my best to push the medium forward. I've always tried to find ways to bring new audiences and new formats and new genres. So I'm really excited to hear what everyone has to say today about the adult animation market. It's the best time ever in the 25 years I've been in it.
That's fantastic. And Dan, can you tell us a little bit about your experience as the editor-in-chief at Animation World Network?
Greetings, everybody, fellow panelists. I'm one of the co-founders of Animation World Network way back in 1995. I've been in this business long enough to remember when we all funneled into one of the editing bays at the studio and watched the original South Park Christmas what they call the Christmas greeting card on VHS when it had just started to make the rounds. I've been Launch VFX World. We've always been a digital platform. Have chronicled the industry from the independent shorts and features to all the big studio stuff. A lot of games integration and the whole digital medium as well, coming with the visual effects revolution. So we've been chronicling the industry for a quarter of a century. As Eric was saying, it's an unprecedented time right now with the explosion of the streaming business. It seems as though there's more animation and related projects that are being greenlit, being released, being worked on than I've ever seen before. And it makes for busy days, but busy and exciting days. So it's a pleasure to be here and talk about some of the stuff with you guys.
Glad to have you here. And Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm the artistic director of the Ottawa International Animation Festival. I've been with the festival for 30 years as of September. I've had different responsibilities over the years, but the most steady being the artistic director and being responsible for selecting, overseeing all the programming that gets presented at the festival. So I do that. I've written a lot on animation. Some people might remember a column called The Animation Pimp that I used to write on AWN. Some people didn't like, which was okay with me. So I've written, I don't know, a number of books about animation, articles. I wrote a short animation film called Lipsit Diaries that was directed by Theodore Ushev. Working on some more animation books right now and a live action feature script for the same Theodore Ushev. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. And Chris, I know that you're not a fan of the term adult animation, so I wanted to give you a challenge. Why do you think it's a term that the industry relies on, and what does it describe?
Well, I guess I've heard that phrase for a long time. It's I guess it always bothered me for a couple of reasons. One, that it normalizes this stereotype, I guess, that animation is by nature cartoon, that it's something made for kids, that it's made to entertain, it's made to make you laugh. And I think we all know that the origins of animation certainly went beyond. It wasn't originally made for children. So I find it's potentially a bit insulting to many animators out there, even though I understand why it's used. Secondly, what has been deemed adult animation over the years, to me, didn't really suggest mature, poetic, artistic work. It was more like South Park, Family Guy, Beavis and Butthead. I'm not criticizing. I like all of those works, but it's just more raunchy sort of comedy than anything else. Yeah, so that's the outline of my issues with the term. I get why it's used to somehow differentiate from the avalanche of kid-orientated animation that's out there. But
Yeah,
it's
no,
I
think
find
that's all fair.
it's a bit simplistic.
Yeah. I think that's all fair. So, John, you wrote a white paper about adult animation. What working definition were you going with? What made the cut? Because not all work that is adult animation or would be considered animation self-identifies as like this is adult animation.
Yeah, I made some arbitrary cutoffs with it just to get so I could get my hands around it. But I wanted to look at it as its own standalone, isolated category. There hadn't been much analysis done of just adult-oriented, adult-targeted animation. So I wanted to kind of get a grip on well, how much is currently on air? How much of it's upcoming? What does it look like? The upcoming stuff. And so I chose 11s, half hours, and up to an hour. I chose to not do anime. And I think this is an interesting question because it's getting so blurry now. Actually, Eric has coined a term for that sort of North American co-produced anime or anime produced in North America. I'll let him give it.
I call it cowboy anime.
And why cowboy?
Well, I think it's interestingly probably because of Powerhouse Entertainment, which is based in Texas, is really, I think, one of the breakthrough production companies that were able to take kind of a 90s action anime look and really create Castlevania, which is, a real signature piece. But I kind of loosely think of cowboy anime as like any anime inspired animation that is like creatively driven from a non-Japanese source. So whether it's like an American IP or a video game or like a Korean director or a Chinese or a French or a Canadian creator who took anime as a big inspiration, and for the consumer might be confused about whether or not it comes from Japan. It just was an easy, silly. It sounds slightly dismissive, but I just like the term.
You know what I equated a little bit to is like you had that era where rock and roll was sort of like blues was happening in the North America, right? And then you had this British wave that was all inspired by rock and roll. And you could argue that anime was originally like a Disney. They were looking at Disney and going, okay, we need big eyes, we need these things. And they sort of did it their own way. And now it's sort of washing back on our coast and like the British wave influenced what happened in North America with the pop scene. So I sort of see it like that kind of.
Yeah. Pretty well documented that Osamu Tezuka based Astro Boy on an early, I think, Mickey Mouse kind of imitation, which is like, here are the big Mickey Mouse ears, and he just kind of made the big pointy version, but it's the same kind of silhouette, the same kind of white gloves and boots. Right. There's a little. I'm gonna go on mute. There's something going by my house.
So I don't know. That's a little more of an answer to your question about what defines adult animation, but I do think it gets interesting now with this kind of Japanese kind of influence on what's going on. Like my research is showing that there's probably upwards of 15 sort of anime kind of inspired, like Western origin IP, like everything from Blade Runner to Godzilla, and that stuff is sort of in the pipeline here. And this is a really new development, right? Like up until now, there's really only been a handful of non-comedy things that are, and these are all kind of genre stuff. They're not comedies. There's only maybe I can think of 3 at the moment. That would be like, Castlevania, Undone, and maybe The Liberator, if you want to include that. But that's about it. Like there's not much else that's like sort of Western IP or like crossover stuff with anime. And all of a sudden we've got like just this huge surge of new stuff coming along here that is in development or production.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Eric, from the production side, is the term adult animation useful?
that's a pretty good question. I mean, I think let me break this from the development point of view, because when you talk about development, a lot of people who are in the industry who want to move from being in a production role to being the originator of an IP or being a showrunner or a creator, we're always kind of trying to read the tea leaves to see what is available, what is marketable, what people want for the next couple of years, because that's what you're really pitching towards. And I think adult animation is a useful term in development because, there's a lot of ideas out there and a lot of creative teams whose natural destiny is to create stuff that is not for kids. And I think so long as they do it sincerely, and I think so long as they understand how high the bar is in terms of sophisticated storytelling, packageable talent, and kind of completeness of presentation, it becomes a very, I think, effective term. I mean, if you look at like Invincible, which is on Amazon, that thing is star casted beyond the level of most television shows. I mean, that thing is filled with, feature film and TV level people. But, it's this interesting switch because, you can get these massive celebrities on shows because it's voiceover. So, it slips between their schedules. They love the work. They don't have to do full makeup. They're in and out in one day sometimes to do like an entire show. And so adult animation becomes like a real business term, I think, that if you're going to say, okay, I'm a creator, I'm a production company, I'm a writer, I'm going to try to do an adult animation, you have to understand how the boardrooms of those buying communities are going to view that. And I think it becomes an important term to understand if you're going to compete in that game, what kind of team you've got to put together to do that. So that's a business side answer. I hope that's helpful from what you're asking.
Yeah, no, that's really clarifying. And Dan, I wanted to ask, editorially, how do you approach what we're calling adult animation?
Well, there's less of a need to pigeonhole anything from an editorial standpoint because that's not how you're presenting it to audiences per se. I've always, to me, adult animation has always just, the term and the silo of adult animation has always historically just been a catch-all for stuff that's not for kids. And for the most part, for years, literally for years, that was always just, sick and twisted and raunchy type stuff. Where else are you going to put it? Because most people really, historically, including people in the industry, still buyers and sellers and programmers alike, animation to them is a genre. It's not a medium. So they need simple ways and simple piles to put things in so they know what to do with it. From an editorial standpoint, more and more, and Eric, this really gets to your point, more and more the way the streamers are approaching what they're greenlighting and what they're moving ahead with, they're really, it's not just stunt casting, it's really, they're doing deals with folks that are giving them creative control that they would potentially get in live action. They're getting it in animation as well. And so they're looking at animation as just another medium to tell stories. There's a lot of creative people out there. There's a lot of stars out there that like being associated with and like the creative freedom of the animation medium. And consequently, from a coverage standpoint, from an editorial standpoint, that's part of what drives the energy and what is exciting about what's going on in the business right now. You've got, all sorts, you've got Oscar-winning actors, Lupita Nyong'o. She's got the first African kid superhero series that she's just wrote as being involved in producing and doing voice work on. Idris Elba. The list is as long as President Barack Obama and Michelle, involved in a show that's using animation. What is it? I forgot the name of it, but point being is that you're seeing more and more people who you associate in anything but animation who are involved in animation. And that coverage is it's being covered everywhere, because more and more the medium is less and less material to the work that they're doing. If that kind of answers your question.
No, it does. So, Dan, you edited the first edition of John's white paper. From your point of view, have you noticed any changes since then in the industry?
Oh, absolutely. We all know that nothing happens quickly in the animation industry, especially when it comes to getting to see something. So there's a lot of I mean, certainly in all of entertainment, there's a lot of development, that a lot of money goes into development with a lot of big names that never sees the light of day. But animation, even with everything working and funding and everything, 24 months later, it arrives. John, in talking with John for the first edition and talking about what and he and I are very, very much aligned with regards to kind of our assessment and what we were seeing. And it was great for him to see someone actually using a discipline to put some form and function to things that's just kind of floating around within the rest of the industry. But since the first edition came out, a lot of the things we saw that were in development are out now, and there's an even bigger wave of things that were put into development that are coming soon. And there's also been a number of the streamers are now live. So what you see is everything that he talked about initially is just, it's an order of magnitude expanded in every way, shape, or form. And it validates everything that was done in the first edition and really helps set up the roadmap for the different places to go with the new edition as well as in future editions.
Well said. Chris, I'm going to broaden the question a bit for you. What changes in adult animation have we seen over the past 2 decades in terms of style, subject matter, or source material?
Oof. That's
That's
quite
a big
question.
Not too broad.
I mean, in general, I can speak, my primary focus is from a festival perspective and with more of a leaning towards independent orientated work. First of all, there's been more animation everywhere than certainly when I started. Yeah, and I think certainly more, I don't know, that's a tough one. If I look anywhere from features, there was a time when I started where features were just Disney. And today that's completely changed. That was the Disney domain. And now you see all sorts of studios and voices and different styles and approaches now. And I think you see that across the board with short films, with series. But still, I do think what's been lacking is maybe more stuff along like what Undone has done, something a bit more cerebral and serious, for lack of a better word. But that's still something that's been missing all these years.
If you don't mind me jumping in, Chris, I've been going to your festival since 94 was actually the first time I went to Ottawa. And the one film that to this day still just like haunts me, which is an early 90s film, was a stop motion short called Ah Pook Is Here, which was basically found audio from William S. Burroughs, I think. And it was just like a narrated bit of found audio. And the animation was a chicken in space in stop motion. And at the end of the short, he blows his own brain out with a shotgun. And I just was like, what is going on? But it left me with such a poetic despair. And I realized that, a piece of existential fiction done in really stunning stop motion. There's a straight line, I think, from that film to, the last two episodes of Midnight Gospel, which like brought me to complete, utter breakdown in tears. And I think I completely agree with you that where adult animation could really use is a lot more authentic, emotional, sincere, kind of meaningful adult conversations, to the point where I'd almost go self-help and adult education and real issues that are driven by someone's need to take on a cause. I feel like that's where adult animation could go, and I hope it goes more into that direction.
And the funny thing is that in indie world, I mean, it's
every other film.
My big complaint is a lack of kind of humorous, genuinely
right.
funny films. And it's all dark and cerebral and existential.
It's
so
very dark.
They're all there for the taking. All those people, please take them.
I want to jump in. My first Ottawa festival was '97. Chris, one of the things that has always been a joy is seeing a lot of what that mature filmmaking was always at the heart of the indie animation movement, because there were a lot of animators that, this was their medium and they had to tell their stories. One of the things that has, I think, changed tremendously, and as you say, it used to be features were Disney. There's a whole group of animators for they're masters of the medium. They're storytellers. They know how to get things done. It's easier to raise $7 million for an independent feature than it is to raise $500,000 for a 12-minute short about your summer when you were 12, when your cousin drowned in the river and died. It's the business side has fueled a real fundamental change in where a lot of that storytelling has gone, and where you used to have a whole huge amount of what I would consider mature, wonderfully literary, narrative-driven animated shorts of all different in all different styles of animation that would be the showcase of a festival like the Ottawa Festival. Now there's dozens and dozens of animated features that are indie features that are being made, totally different type of storytelling, because it's got a totally different, there's an actual market for it. So it's got to be, the story has to be sellable, as opposed to, I spent 7 years scratching on plaster to make a film. It's going to have a festival run, and that's that.
Dan, I'm going to draft off that because I think you're totally right. I mean, if you look at films like Funan and Breadwinner, those, sub $15 million, often local government subsidized, kind of films can attract indie distributors, can attract celebrity support, can attract financing, and actually tell very signature stories if they're considered important, if they're considered relevant, if they have some kind of cultural impact. Those kind of films, I think, are getting financed a lot right now around the world, and I'm looking forward to more of that stuff coming out of Vietnam, and coming out of Cambodia, and coming out of Malaysia. But we're used to seeing it like out of France and Ireland and Australia. But just as an Asian American, I'm hoping we're going to get more of those kind of stories, and in the feature format too, which is really fun.
I mean, Funan, you probably couldn't tell that exact type. It would be gut-wrenchingly difficult and gut-wrenching to have told that story in live action.
It's hard to watch in 2D. It's already hard to watch.
And they didn't stylize, and they didn't include stylized violence of that horrible period in Cambodia. But your point is very well taken, and that is that animation also allows, and more you're seeing it in animated adult, really mature content with things like Flea that just came out, animated documentaries. You can use animation to tell a story, to soften it in a way that you potentially can tell and talk about adult things that you may not necessarily be able to get to that audience if you did it in live action.
Mm-hmm. If I could add something here too, is that Historically, if you think about the bulk of adult animation, it has been comedy. It's like irreverent, quirky, you know, the sort of classic idea of adult animation. That stuff doesn't actually export very well. It's very particular American voice. I personally tried to sell some of this stuff myself overseas. You know, a comedy that I produced for the American market that worked perfectly fine. I can think of Gary and His Demons as a good example of a series that we produced, worked well, aired on Sci-Fi here domestically, but I couldn't find anybody to buy it because it was very kind of, actually that's made by Canadians, interestingly, but it's a North American voice to it. But what's cool about it is that if you think about streamers, the largest category they spend on is long format dramatic content. Now, if animation can like take arguably 5-10% of that budget, it's multi-billion-dollar budget for all the streamers. It all of a sudden you grow the pie of what, you know, how much money is being spent on adult animation from this comedy, you know, subcategory that's very domestic to an international thing. And those guys all need international content because they all have ambitions to have their platforms available and all, you know, worldwide. So when you do a deal with Netflix, you're doing it for the world. So it kind of all lines up to sort of going from arguably low billions of a dollar industry, arguably up to $12-15 billion industry over the next 5 years or so. So it really, I think, kind of opens up the lens when you start to get outside this comedy, you know, zone. You start to really open up some new avenues for investment in new content.
But John, isn't that also true for, that's also true for, you know, live action film and TV? I mean, that's always been the case where unless with there's always exceptions, but, you know, any culture specific television show comedy doesn't usually go out from there.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, Filipino comedies don't export to Japan, and, you know, French comedies don't export well to Canada. And, you know, I think it's really comedy. But I found what's interesting is for the first time that I can see is that anime comedy actually exports to the world. So, you know, the kind of world otaku language, you know, they get anime comedy and they've embraced it and kind of understand it. And to me, that's a real anomaly of mass media.
I think so, but I still feel like it's a little part of its appeal is its exoticness. Whereas if you're producing like classic Western stories for the world, there's I think an understanding of Western storytelling in general that just makes it imminently.
But now there's an understanding of anime storytelling worldwide.
Fair enough, but
so I think it goes.
I still think there's a bit of a lid on it in the end, like anime. I just kind of do. I don't know if that's fair or not. Whereas I don't think there's a lid on what could happen with Western genre stuff as it starts to gain traction here worldwide. Like I think we'll see some franchises here in the next 5 years that will be original content that will be, you know, either a horror or sci-fi or something that just blow up worldwide. And I think that's.
I will counterpoint in that just because you know, there's this really great book written by Roland Keltz called Japan America. It was about the soft power of Japanese culture, and he had this really interesting chapter of what he called the fishing lure effect. So his idea was that, you know, you're driving through Vermont, let's say, and you go by this little small town and there's like a store that says buy fishing lures here, right? So someone's uncle's son's nephew draws a little cartoon character and says, please come in the store, right? So, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it's Snoopy, it's Mickey Mouse, whatever. And what Roland really found is that it's Yu-Gi-Oh now.
Yeah.
You know, so you're talking about like the literal language of illustration for like a tectonic plate below of an age demographic is more Eastern than it is Western. So when we talk about like the massive explosion of anime as a storytelling style, there's always going to be this different opinion, and it often is like, you know, our age, right? So there's like what I call like the Naruto line.
Yeah.
So if you're like over 25 or 30, you've never seen a Naruto episode.
Right.
And if you're under 25 or 30, you've seen hundreds of episodes.
I probably overstated my case a little bit.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a rising tide for both. Like, I think anime is going to be perfectly fine here going forward. It will be a burgeoning business. Similarly, I think this kind of new category of genre Western stuff is going to be a big category.
Yeah, agreed.
The one limitation, I think, is the how much output can you get out of Japan. I think you have more familiarity with that. Like, there are real limitations to how much.
It's a problem. It's a problem. Yeah.
John, part of what you also said with regards to difficulty in selling that Western type of content, the more adult content overseas, some of that is also dictated by the fact that thematically and subject matter, there's just a lot of territories that there's nowhere it can go there. So
yeah,
it's
the actual money is there.
And that's not the case coming from, for example, Asia to Western markets. So
right. But can you expand a little bit on what you see is going on with the anime business? Like, I'm really curious, Eric, about the anime studios, who they're working with, what is the ceiling, what's your sense of how that is going to evolve over the next 3-5 years?
Yeah, I mean, Japan in general is facing an aging population of talented 2D animation directors, and so there's efforts even by Netflix to actually subsidize education of new talent to try to fill in, where they're aging out. I mean, I think the biggest movements I see in the anime production side is that there used to be what's called the consortium model. Well, it still exists. The consortium model is that a subcommittee company is created, which is, like a dozen investors, and that amount of money is usually used to kind of finance an original anime that's based on a manga. So that structure, 70, 80 years, has just been going. But with the advent of powerful streamers, you're now getting more of a Western style or an international co-pro style, where you're getting single commissioners, single financiers. You're getting Netflix originals, Amazon originals, Crunchyroll originals, which means that one big company is now paying for the entire budget of a show that may not have, the classic business pyramid of Japan, which is, manga, merchandise, game, supporting the animation. So the whole business model is kind of going crazy. On top of that, a few years ago, Netflix, through one of their very, very savvy Japanese local executives, were able to shore up years of production capacity via throughput deals. So, some of the biggest companies like, Sunrise and Production IG and Gainax and, Studio Wit and all these people, they have like multi-year, multi-series deals, and you can't even get in there to get a series from them because they're booked up through 22, 23. And then China came in and also bought up a bunch of capacity for animation that is aimed directly towards the Chinese market, that's based on, Chinese franchise material. So it's just like everyone there, I found, is at like 150% capacity. And, they live in exhaustion, and they live in this really horrific working environment where they're working 14, 16 hours and taking 3-4 jobs. So every day I think it's going to collapse, and every day, 50 to 70 or so anime series a week come out. And it's just, it's mind-boggling.
Eric, don't you think one of the things that's going to come from all of this, I don't know that I can say I see it, but I sense it, especially with what Netflix is doing and how they're not just buying series, but they're investing in infrastructure and support, supporting studio space and all the stuff you need to actually get this stuff made. Do you think that with the Western money coming in, they're going to provide, they're going to kind of usurp the talent? Because the traditionally it's been so, I don't know if exploitative is the wrong word, and it's certainly a strong word, but the Japanese artist community within the animation business has worked so hard for decades, so hard, so many years, made so little money, that compared to what goes on in the West, they're making stuff that is generating billions of dollars in licensing and distribution deals, and they're making $20,000 a year working 16 hours a day. That one of the things the Western studios can do is come in and say, we've got the money, we've got the market, you know, the water's a lot nicer over here.
I think it all sounds from a business perspective like it should, but having, worked over there and spent a year on the ground and seeing the culture of how it works, Japanese anime studios have an incredible ability to not change. And, I found out things over there that by our standards are shocking. It's the culture of where they work. It is impolite for a staff member to have a discussion with a manager about how much they're getting paid on a job. It's just everything's flipped. So it's loyalty, it's reputation, it's trust. So if I'm like, let's say, a layout artist, and I get a call from my usual production manager guy, we have a relationship, right? And that relationship means I'm going to call you, you do the work, and when it's done, I'll receive a check. And when I look at that check, I'll go, oh, I'll work with that guy again, I suppose. So it's everything is like flipped. And it's really, really hard. I mean, 15 years, I would say I worked with Japanese companies, and it's very, very hard to change things over there. Very difficult. And I really hope they do. I hope that they live better lives. I hope they're treated more humanely. But then I just see the crushing social, political pressure to, why are you being so selfish? Why should you ask for more when it's an honor to work with this director? You should be thankful to work with this show. And
what's interesting about that?
it hurts. It hurts. I'm super American. So for me, it's infuriating. But from their perspective, I think it will take, it doesn't, what I found in general, it takes an internal master with external culture influence to change things. It's never a foreigner who changed things in Japan. It's always someone inside who says, okay, I've done 12 business trips out. I've lived a year abroad. I come back. I'm going to change things. But foreigners can do this all they want and nothing changes.
Can I? Do you mind if I shift gears a little bit, Mike? Just in terms of my sense of like the ways series are getting sold now, because we're moving away from this comedy thing, which tended to be, a lot of it came from like William Street, like insider game, right? Like it was a real insider baseball game about who got to make shows and things like that. But you're seeing increasingly more shows that are coming from various sources, some international now, increasingly because of the genre opportunity. I see opportunities for international studios to play in the US market in genre much easier than I do comedy, right? It's just a harder thing to bring. I've actually encouraged studios, international studios, hey, they bring me a comedy idea and I go, that's going to be a rough sell. You need proven writers these days in order to get things sold. So what I'm seeing kind of interesting is partnerships between studios that maybe do live action. So they have like a writing team of folks that they've been working with and are familiar with and have credits, teaming up with animation studios to like make more ambitious kinds of projects. I'm seeing that trend more than it ever used to be, right? And that can sometimes bring star talent to bear on projects like a shingle, like for a star that maybe wants to get into animation. That's a pretty nice little combo when you go in with the star, some decent writing talent and a production studio that's maybe an international studio. I really see a big opportunity there for people to kind of team up because of the shortness. We're so shy on talent here in studios in the US. Everybody's kind of maxed out, that I see this emerging opportunity here for international studios. I just want to put that out there and see if anybody had.
No, I like that advice. Why don't we go around? Chris, what advice would you give to artists who are pitching adult animated projects in 2021?
Oh boy, I don't know if I'm the person to ask that about pitching stuff, because to me, you do what you want, do what's genuine to you. I mean, I've told indie people that too. Like if you look back at creators of The Simpsons and South Park, Beavis and Butthead, all those guys started by just doing their own independent shorts the way they wanted to do it, and the industry came to them. Mike Judge and stuff like that. So,
Chris, what if we switch it to what do you think is the most exciting kind of talent you're seeing in the indie scene right now?
Oh, I don't know if there's a specific. Um, I mean, it's really more diverse, culturally diverse than I've
Oh,
seen in the past. Just more of a willingness to experiment. The student work tends to still be the most exciting stuff because that's when people are just putting it all out there.
are you seeing more women and African Americans doing animated shorts or Latinos?
Yes, for sure. Although, I mean, I feel like in some ways the indie community has always been pretty good
Yeah, yeah,
with balance, at least with female animators. But certainly there's a lot more um, these days. Yeah, for sure.
Do you feel like they're mostly working in 2D or 3D, or do you see like an alteration of trend towards media?
Boy, I see it all over the place.
Mm.
It's why I always find it funny if I read mainstream papers and they're saying that the death of drawn animation, the death of this. I mean, just go to a festival and you see the entries we get. Everything is there still. Stuff that you thought was long gone, maybe should be long gone, still there.
Yeah,
Eric, one trend I'm seeing is the influence of video games on the upcoming animation.
Yeah.
There's probably 8 to 10 new series coming up based on major video game franchises, and this is part of that whole like people growing up with CG animated, cinematics inside video games and things like that. And that's a pretty big change, right? Because up until now, for the most part, adult animation is a 2D thing. But we've got all these new 3D CG kind of, made in Unreal kind of stories on the horizon here that I think are going to be really interesting to watch. Like, is that a thing? Can does it work?
well, I think it's funny because the big exception is Dota. The new Dota series done by Studio Mir is like fantastically animated.
Mm-hmm.
But you're correct. There's a ton of 3D stuff coming out there. I mean, I had the opportunity to see a little bit of the never released fully high-end 3D animated League of Legends series that
Mm-hmm.
still has yet to find a distributor. But that was like it felt like an unlimited budget on a story for that. For some reason, no one's buying. Like no one has bought that series.
I mean, did you like it? Did you think, oh, this is why wouldn't this get sold? Or did you see maybe why it didn't?
Well, I think, I think Riot Games in general and the League of Legends brand has always been like the most beautiful fight porn, which is they love character design, they love artifice, they love visual, they love choreography, but they've had very little story and very little character development beyond the shorts. So they have narrative and they have lore and actually, believe it or not, directed one of their early cinematics based on a champion. But it becomes this kind of like, oh, we've got hundreds and hundreds of champions, hundreds and hundreds of diverse worlds, and there's great writers who have really got in there and trying to break it, but they haven't broken it yet. It just hasn't been done. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, to me, I never fully attached to what they were doing just because I like emotionally complex stories. I like grounded realism even in my fantasy. I mean, I work for the Russo brothers and I like the MCU tone. And I just felt that they were always so good at making things look so good and but that can get in the way to just having, two characters have a conversation and have something emotionally revelatory. If everything
Yeah.
has to be like beautiful and shot and everything and
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in
yeah.
real quick, and just while we still have a little time, your question about pitching. I think my perspective on pitching is having sat through so many pitches where I just scratch my head. My focus with regards to pitching really has nothing to do with the project per se. It has to do with the project, the process of pitching. And my recommendations to anybody who wants to start trying to get their work out there is it's process. You have to be comfortable with the process, and you have to be ready to jettison what your baby, because people aren't interested in it for whatever reason, including just the way you're pitching it. There are pitches that get recycled and come back later, and they're much better. It's the same core. You have to be able to tell your story. Pitching is it's like peeling an onion. You need to be able to tell someone in 30 seconds what your story's about. And if you can't get their attention, it's over. And then maybe you get another minute or two and you go a little deeper. You need to be able to present what is exciting, interesting, energetic, unique about your property. And if they're really interested, then all the other stuff is going to be doable because they're interested in working with you while you kind of give them more information. But if you're not able to communicate, it doesn't matter what your story is, what your medium is. You've got great drawings, and it sounds like it's the easiest thing in the world. But for so many people that spend months and months and months putting together materials to go pitch, you listen to them and they can't articulate anything really about what their project is what it's about, and get someone who when they finish, it's like, and then what happens? What comes next? And if you can't get someone to say, what comes next? What happens next? It's over.
Yeah, it's a skill. Eric, I wanted to ask you, based on your experience in projects like Afro Samurai, what is it like doing development for a project that is so ahead of its time?
Yeah, I mean, I spent the majority of my career in development, so I've seen all kind of projects come and go. If there was a magic formula that made it work, no one's discovered it yet. I think I always refer to the movie The Player, as kind of like this example of when development is so perfect that everyone just kind of goes crazy for it. And it's a magic potion. There's all these elements that you think are going to sell something. There's all these things that you think, oh, here's a great log line, here's a great elevator pitch, here's a great show Bible. But sometimes it just has to just be so uniquely, incredibly new, or so familiar and new that it just knocks everyone's socks off. And I think I'll also go off a little bit what Dan was saying, and also this leans out to you into Chris's world too. If you're trying to present a new idea out there, I felt so far in my life that it's been a combination of two things. One, it's super insider baseball. So, if you are working 10 years at Cartoon Network, you have a good chance getting a Cartoon Network show. If you're working 15 years at Warner Brothers Animation, you've gotten up the ranks, everyone's comfortable with you. Hey, you're a good old boy. They're going to give you the latest version of Thundercats, right? Or you've got to get out there with something complete that made the world notice. So if you can get into a festival like Ottawa, you can get into an NSC with a piece of work that is so uniquely you'll get noticed. You'll start to climb in through the other way, which is you're a true filmmaker. And I think what's interesting now is that I hope to see more true filmmakers come into development and work with talented writers and producers and packaging to make something new. But what I love and will always love about Chris's world is that in that environment, it is trial by fire, and you can try anything. And if you get away with it, you can start to spin things around and make things happen. And so, I think the indie animation world and adult animation world are always going to kind of sit hand in hand. And, you'll hope that those talents will cross over. Or, like someone, like I'm a huge fan of like Howie Shia. I don't know if you guys know his work. Fantastic Canadian animation director. He's done adult animation his whole career. He's never had a show. He's got a perfectly fine career. Because the Canadian Film Board is always going to give him money for his next short because he's that good. Or, you talk about Denver Jackson, who's an independent animator outside of Vancouver who made a feature film on his own for $125,000 by himself, Or what's the, Chris, was that guy from, I want to say like Gintz, I think is his name.
Oh, right, the Latvian.
Yeah, from Latvia. I mean, his
He
feature
did
film.
Alone, which
Yeah, he did. He did. 75 minutes, not a single piece of dialogue. Felt like I was playing a video game. Incredible. But so I think
Has been
I love how
hotel.
adult animation has other ways to go out there, not just the streamers.
Sorry, I was just going to throw in Has Been Hotel was an interesting one, right? A short that A24 picked up the rights to and are going to make it into a series. That was just one woman's standalone, piece that she brought all her friends in and did a raise on Kickstarter. I call them like seed formats. I think podcasting is actually an interesting place to start long form dramatic series that might evolve into animated series. That's another.
Midnight Gospel. Midnight Gospel is a podcast.
Yeah.
100%.
So podcast, short format on YouTube. Also the comic scene, especially that one that's developed in South Korea. What's the site called where they have all
Webtoons?
Webtoons.
Yeah, Webtoons. I think that's a totally legit place to start IP and get it going and build an audience, like to Eric's point about trying to go the more indie route. I still think, though, that either you have to have some real momentum there, like millions and millions of views type of thing.
Billions on Webtoons.
Yeah. And then similarly, either that or you need packaging. Like I always think about going to market now. It's a lot different than the game used to be. It used to be all that insider stuff up through the ranks of the various places like Adult Swim. But then more recently, I think it's more of either prove it out on social, like I was saying, or package, like bring in, if it's got music, bring in like a hip hop music label and attach a star if you need to, and get a writing crew on the project so that it's got its own momentum heading into the marketplace. Because I don't think it's enough, frankly, for original ideas just to go in. I've got this great idea. Unless you've got maybe a track record of already having your own show, I think it's pretty hard to do. A pretty hard thing to do at the moment, the way the market shaped.
So, John, we're almost out of time, but where can our viewers see more of your projects or follow you on the web?
The white paper is going to drop here next week, actually on Toon Boom's site, which is kind of cool. They've been generous enough to sponsor the white paper. So it's going to reside on Toon Boom's site. It should be, I think, dropping on Wednesday. And then I have my own site, highconcentrate.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn if anybody wants to, follow me there.
Right. And Chris, where can people find you on the web?
Don't.
He's elusive. You're getting a rare Chris sighting.
Don't encourage that.
You can go to animationfestival.ca and look around, I guess.
All right. Yeah, that's a great website.
We are open for
entries. I love the Ottawa
So.
International Animation Festival.
Oh, are you open for entries right now? When's the new deadline?
End of May.
End of May.
We're open now. No fees.
Yeah.
I mean, you can send some if you want. It's not going to help.
And can you think of any websites that our viewers might want to look at after the stream?
I'm sorry. Were you asking me?
Yeah.
Your name's Dan, right?
He's setting you up.
I didn't quite hear Dan. Okay, ask the question again.
Tell us about Animation World Network.
There we go.
Goodness.
There it is.
You can find the animation pimp on it if you dig down deep enough. At awn.com, we cover the world of animation. We cover a lot of visual effects driven work, both episodic and in the feature film world, where there's some convergence with games. You can find, we don't review things. We tend to dig deep into the craft. We don't get too bits and bytes, but sometimes we do. And there's the amount of vibrant stuff that's going on right now that we get an opportunity to just touch on. I'd love to be able to spend, if we had 5 times the staff that we have, we'd still would not be able to cover everything that we'd like to with all the great stuff that's going on. So, you come to a site like ours and you just poke around, you can get a good sense day in, day out, who's doing what and what's getting traction. And that also can help you with regards to your own ideas and paths you may want to take, both from a career standpoint as well as from a creative standpoint.
Well said. And Eric, where can people find out more about what you do?
Well, I'm like John, which is I'm an incessant LinkedIn user, which is I don't know. I just love it. I don't know why, but I have like 11,000 followers there, and I incessantly talk about just whatever I'm interested in the animation world. So whether it's a preschool show, which I think is great, by the way, City of Ghosts, so good, or it's an adult animation or a piece of industry trade. So I like to have a lot of active conversations about the industry in general on LinkedIn. I also have my surviving animation platform on YouTube, which is helps anyone in the world of cartoons. It focuses a little bit on development, but it does talk about the trade in general. So, my next upcoming episode, which I'll plug, is going to be called "How Much Money Do You Make in Development?" So I'll talk a little bit about the economics behind what you can expect to actually put in your pocket over the 1 to 5 years it takes to do development. And then, if for anyone who wants to engage me as a consultant or find out more about working directly with me, I have CaptainCalderon.com, and that's usually where people come to me if they want to directly do a consultation with me. And if you follow me on Instagram, it's just my dog.
Which is not bad. So thank you all for joining us for today's panel discussion. And if you are interested in the second edition of the Adult Animation White Paper, keep an eye on toonboom.com next week. And speaking of next week, next Tuesday, Mike Morris will be joining us again for Collaboratory. That's our improv storyboard stream. The previous episode is now on YouTube and includes helpful tips about improving your boards with flat and dynamic staging. So be sure to tune in next time.